PvP Basics with WildSusanBoyle. A beginner's and enthusiast's guide to Pokemon Go trainer battles. Introduction. Pokemon Go reinvents what it means to be a trainer. Using a decades-old system, Niantic has blended a turn-based adventure game into the real world, allowing players to travel, catch, and battle together across the globe. In our first moments, Pokemon Go has already introduced us to a new way of collecting Pokemon. Different resources, including candy and stardust, are put towards gyms and raid battles, where hundreds of attacks are reimagined. And, in December of 2018, Niantic unveiled trainer battles, where players could harness the full extent of their Pokemon Go knowledge, challenging others in a head-to-head battle. For those familiar with Pokemon and its main series games, it is important to recognize the changes that have taken place during this translation. Although Pokemon Go trainer battles have simplified many aspects of the franchise, it also gives players a great deal of control. The ideas here are presented in my voice alone, but are the results of countless hours from the entire community. The purpose of this guide is to create a home for common concepts, PvP jargon, and theories. Each chapter is meant to establish an understanding of the game that will permeate through every level of play, bridging the gaps between all of Pokemon Go's trainers. Chapter 1. Understanding Pokemon. Minor differences between Pokemon can have rippling effects on both its role and its capabilities. In this chapter, we will examine the qualities that constitute and differentiate Pokemon in trainer battles. Typing makes up the competitive ecosystem, introducing natural strengths and weaknesses for every species. A detailed look into stat product shows how misleading combat power can be, and only through a Pokemon's moveset and attacks do battles truly come to life. Typing. Type effectiveness guides Pokemon gameplay, ensuring no Pokemon or move is unstoppable. There are 18 element-like types that interact with a certain degree of effectiveness we call weaknesses and resistances. In the games, these interactions are displayed as super effective and not very effective. Some types, such as Ghost and Normal, are predominantly neutral with no clear advantages versus the majority. On the other hand, the Steel typing and its 11 resistances may seem unfair, but it only empowers other types that see its weaknesses as an opportunity. This way, every Pokemon has a role, no matter how small. In addition, a Pokemon can have up to 2 types, making up a total of 171 single and dual type combinations. Overlapping type effectiveness found in dual type Pokemon can increase, decrease, or neutralize damage received. For example, Bastiodon is both rock and steel, resulting in twice the resistance against normal type moves, but is also twice as vulnerable to fighting and ground. Secondary types tend to improve a Pokemon's standing by customizing resistances and granting access to different moves. Coaching Corner. Many type interactions follow logic. Fire is weak to water, grass is weak to fire, and so on. However, abstract types like dark and poison will take time to familiarize. Various memory techniques involve stories, acronyms, and chunking of types can help expedite this process. My personal method for remembering types is to group them in trios. Fire, grass, and water is where most trainers start their journey. You can add to what you know or create new chunks like electric, flying, and ground. The more creative you are, the easier it is to remember. Think psychic types, traditionally symbolized by an eye. Frightened by bugs and ghosts, and blinded by the darkness, even psychics become traumatized, hide, and shut their eyes. Most type analyses center around a Pokemon's defensive capabilities, but type advantage comes in a second form. Every move possesses one of 18 types, distinct from the user itself. Though unlikely, this means that a fire-type Pokemon could theoretically use a water-type move. More importantly, this introduces an offensive lane of type interactions found in the left column of the type chart. This distinction between damage dealt and received makes gameplay less predictable between two Pokemon, lessening the importance of innate typing. In the main series games, specific types have no effect on others. Example, ground-type Pokemon are immune to electric-type moves. In Pokemon Go, immunity is treated as a double resistance, which is normally reserved for specific dual-type combinations. For a dragon and ground type such as Garchomp, electric resistance plus immunity adds up to triple resistance. In the case of ground and water like Swampert, electric immunity plus weaknesses will be subtracted into a single resistance. Stat product. Attack, defense, and stamina are the 3 stats assigned to every species in Pokemon Go. The attack stat helps determine the damage output of a Pokemon, while defense determines the damage reduced and received. Stamina, otherwise known as hit points or health, measures how much damage a Pokemon can take before fainting. Since defense and stamina are both properties that affect the survivability of a Pokemon, it is often described together as bulk. Consistent across all Pokemon of the same species are its base stats and level progression. Base stats are fixed values for each Pokemon to ensure all Gengar, for example, have high attack in accordance with its level and growth. Any difference between 2 of the same Pokemon is the result of individual values, IVs, a set of randomized stats that provide a boost in any direction. Traditionally, seeking out Pokemon with maximum IVs in each stat means maximizing its potential. Therefore, a Pokemon appraised at 15 attack, 15 defense, and 15 HP is often called perfect or a hundo. Each individual stat increases damage or bulk, improving its total damage output, TDO, even if by a little. This is true in the main series games, raids, and even Master League trainer battles. However, both Great, under CP of 1500, and Ultra League, under CP 2500, impose a combat power CP limit that requires stat optimization. To understand how Pokemon are affected by this restriction, we must understand how CP is calculated in Pokemon Go. The analogy often used in the PvP community is to imagine a container filled with basketballs, baseballs, and tennis balls. The container's volumetric size is a metaphor for the CP limit. Every basketball represents an individual attack stat, a baseball for every defense, and a tennis ball for every HP. A baseball and a tennis ball are roughly the same size, occupying small amounts of the container, though still one ball, a basketball, takes up much more space, thus filling the container with fewer total balls. The CP formula is calculated similarly, where Pokemon with high attack stats often have the higher CP, meaning too much attack quickly meets the CP limit for Pokemon in the Great League and Ultra League. Therefore, stat optimization favors Pokemon with low attack because it can be substituted by many more defense or HP stats. To compare the stats of different Pokemon, we finally look towards stat product by multiplying attack, defense, and stamina together. Unlike CP, the result is a simple and unbiased average. This all-encompassing stat value is directly related to the endurance and TDO of a Pokemon, allowing all IV combinations to be ranked within or across species. Stat product, bulk, PvP IVs, and TDO are terms that describe the stats of a Pokemon in trainer battles. They are all linked to the idea that CP alone does not speak to a Pokemon's prowess. Instead, it is the sole reason PvP emphasizes bulk in IVs and in general. Check it out. Trainer Battle Rank Checker. Although the players have no control over base stats, they can seek out Pokemon with IVs catered towards bulk. Stadium Gaming provides a comprehensive tool for analyzing the PvP IVs of a Pokemon. A quick search will show you the rank, distribution, CP, and cost to invest in all your trainer battle needs. Moveset. The type effectiveness and attack stat of a Pokemon is merely an amplification for the damage dealt using moves, also known as attacks or techniques. Inspired by but distinct from the main series games, fast and charge attacks exist only in Pokemon Go. They share the same names and type as the original, but their damage and energy are explicitly designed for PvP. Fast attacks. Fast attacks are the default form of combat in Pokemon Go, possessing 4 attributes that make them as unique as Pokemon: type, damage, energy, and turn duration. Each move has a fixed type, independent of its user. It takes an offensive approach to type effectiveness, capable of overturning an unfavorable defense. Being able to interact outside the bounds of a Pokemon's innate typing encourages multi-layered gameplay. Alternatively, using a move that matches the type of its user also has benefits, granting same type attack bonus, stab, for a 20% damage increase. Damage is self-explanatory, describing the harm inflicted by either fast or charge attacks. Some moves will deal an overwhelming amount of damage, while others are hardly noticeable. Damage dealt by each move may be predetermined, but it is adjusted by the user's attack stat, the opponent's defense, as well as typing for both sides. In addition to dealing damage, fast attacks generate energy. Energy is the currency collected by fast attacks for charge attacks. Unlike damage, energy values are unaffected by other factors, meaning the same fast attack will only ever generate the same amount of energy. Each fast attack lasts a certain number of turns, describing the time it takes to apply damage, generate energy, and most importantly, for the next action to occur. A turn is equivalent to 0.5 seconds, and the longest fast attacks last 5 turns, or 2.5 seconds. Turn duration affects other values by forcing fast attacks to deal damage and generate energy in chunks. But when analyzing moves on a per turn basis, you may find no differences beyond their animated duration. Check it out. Pokemon Go PvP moves. Moves in Pokemon Go have values that are unique to PvP. PvPoke provides an updated list of all the fast and charge attacks found within the game. You can search or sort using any of the attributes discussed within the chapter and even explore moveset combinations. Charge attacks. Charge attacks utilize energy to deal bursts of damage. Typing and damage of charge attacks have the same interactions as its counterpart, but instead of generating energy, it is consumed. In addition, each Pokemon can have up to 2 charge attacks for a total of 3 distinct moves. Certain charge attacks can defeat an entire Pokemon, while others are meant to chip away at the opponent. Energy consumption ranges between 35 to 80 energy, with damage scaling alongside expenditure. Note that exclusive, time-limited, and stat-changing moves are tuned to be much more powerful. Unknown to many players, charge attacks have a turn duration of 1. They can be interpreted as a highly compressed 1-turn move, no different from a fast attack. This means the previous actions of a Pokemon must be complete before casting a charge attack, but its implications are used primarily in high-level play. Damage and energy are 2 sides of the same coin. Regardless of the move, the purpose is to inflict damage. Energy shifts the importance away from fast attacks, especially in cases where a Pokemon has a more effective charge attack. Choosing the best moveset is a mix between maximizing damage and offering type effectiveness for uphill battles. Coaching Corner. Figuring out what Pokemon and move will deal the most damage against an opponent can be a complicated process. In addition to type effectiveness and stat product, we must now consider stab and the base power for each move. Remember, typing is the heart and soul of the Pokemon franchise. Dealing damage that is most effective should be a priority in almost every scenario. When in doubt, cast the charge attack that matches the user's typing. Stab will provide a small but needed bonus when all options seem alike. Lastly, the higher its cost, the more energy efficient it will be. For every Pokemon added to your arsenal, a little research can go a long way. Designating a go-to charge attack will be particularly useful for a Pokemon with atypical movesets, such as an Abomasnow and Seeking. Conclusion. Matching types, stat product, and moveset are not uncommon, but minor adjustments to any Pokemon can change the outcome of a battle and even the entirety of its role. The combination of these qualities is what allows so many different Pokemon to compete in trainer battles. Their ability to overcome one another can be examined and explained using its building blocks. Only when we understand Pokemon at face value can we begin to build for synergy and strategy. Chapter 2: PvP Mechanics. Mechanics describe how the game works by design. Pokemon Go includes throwing, spinning, and performing excellent throws when catching Pokemon. Although they are central to the overall gameplay, they are not relevant to trainer battles. On the battlefield, 5 mechanics acts as the law of nature. Everything that occurs within this context result from fast attacks, charge attacks, protect shields, switches, and effects. This is how the player interacts with the game. Each mechanic is simple to understand and execute, but a simple format can become intricate through the synergy of its components. This chapter emphasizes the control trainers have over the individual actions. Fast and charge attacks contribute to the makeup of a Pokemon while also being active tools for combat. To evade damage and bad matchups, players have the option to shield or switch. Lastly, stat-changing effects, more specifically described as buffs and debuffs, are tied directly to the use of certain moves. A deeper understanding of these mechanics will help guide decision-making for the fast-paced environment of PvP. Fast Attack. Tapping on any empty screen space during battle will activate the fast attack assigned to your current Pokemon. When not performing any other actions, a player should default to using fast attacks. Dealing damage and generating energy are the distinguishing features of a fast attack. There is often a balance between the two values, meaning an excess of damage will lessen the amount of energy produced. For example, Razor Leaf is one of the hardest hitting fast attacks, offset by the lack of energy generation. Bullet Seed is also a grass-type fast attack, but instead caters towards energy. Most types offer an array of moves that provide players with a choice between damage, energy, or both. Energy converted into charge attacks will inflict more damage. However, fast attacks are continuous, unavoidable, and difficult to overcome. The best way to mitigate damage from fast attacks is through the typing and stat product of Pokemon themselves. Charge Attack. Charge attacks appear at the bottom of the screen. If an energy requirement is met, the corresponding move name and circle will be highlighted. Tapping it will trigger the move during the next available turn, transitioning into a type-based minigame where damage is determined by the number of icons cleared. The energy collected from fast attacks is used as currency for charge attacks. Imagine each Pokemon having a personal bank account with a limit of 100 energy. Too little energy means the Pokemon will not afford a charge attack, and too much means the Pokemon is working unpaid overtime. With enough energy, moves that cost 50 energy or less can be cast back to back. As you generate energy throughout a battle, your Pokemon's charge attack circles will gradually fill up proportionally to its costs. Once you have exceeded the necessary energy to cast a move, the circle will again fill up from the bottom but remain highlighted to show you that it is ready. Casting a charge attack begins a minigame that requires tapping and swiping icons to maximize damage. All 18 types have a unique minigame pattern where 31 to 32 icons gradually appear on the screen. If a minimum of 31 icons is successfully cleared, an excellent will be displayed on the screen, dealing 100% of its intended damage. Each icon less will reduce its damage by 2.5% down to a minimum of 25%. Only once the minigame has been completed will the move name and animation be shown to the opponent. Coaching Corner. Charge attack circles are the only indicators of energy in-game. Knowing the cost of your moves can give you an estimate of its damage, your energy limit, and the speed at which you generate energy. Paying attention to when your opponent uses a charge attack will also give you an idea of your comparative pacing. Both fast and charge attacks can be tailored towards damage or energy. The most notable descriptor for this relationship is whether a move set is spammy. A high energy fast attack paired with a low cost charge attack is considered as such, casting charge attacks at a much higher rate than the average Pokemon. Conversely, a more damage-focused fast attack often fails to fully utilize charge attacks, which provide additional damage and type effectiveness. Protect Shield. The number of Protect Shields available to each player are displayed as purple hexagons above the Pokemon. When on the receiving end of a charge attack, players will be prompted to tap and use the damage nullifying barrier. Taking no action or by pressing Not Now, the menu will close and set aside the remaining shields. All players start with 2 Protect Shields that are used to reduce damage from charge attacks. While the opponent navigates through their charge attack minigame, the defending player will be allowed to deploy a shield. When deployed, the move will still cast, but all incoming damage is reduced to 1. Shields affect only the damage variable, meaning the energy cost will be consumed and any effects may still be applied. Even though charge attacks can deal significant bursts of damage, a player must work their way through multiple shields. A simple solution would be to bypass shields altogether using only fast attacks. However, drawbacks of a single and slow source of damage will make uphill battles more challenging. Our remaining options are to draw out the opponent's shields as quickly as possible, leaving their Pokemon defenseless to charge attacks. A spammy moveset may seem ideal for applying shield pressure, but low-cost charge attacks often lack the damage needed to threaten an opponent. Adding a more expensive charge attack to the equation makes it possible to intimidate others into using shields. A successful shield bait will allow Pokemon to conserve energy for their next charge attack. This comes as a risk of wasting energy if the opponent calls the bluff. Lastly, shield pressure can also be applied across an entire match using all 3 Pokemon. In some cases, if each Pokemon were to make it to only 1 charge attack, a final unshielded move can still turn the tide of battle. Coaching Corner. With only 2 shields for 3 Pokemon and multiple charge attacks, it is impossible to defend all Pokemon brought into battle. Even with prior knowledge of an opponent's team and moveset, the value of every potential shield is up for debate. The only constant is the amount of damage a move will deal to a particular Pokemon, thus being our measure for a shield's value. Reflecting on the previous chapter, we know that type effectiveness is the greatest amplifier for damage, followed by stab, stat product, and charge attack cost. Deploying shields against augmented moves and protecting your Pokemon from the most damage possible is the first step to mastering shield use. At higher levels of gameplay, a player may also prioritize shielding based on the value of Pokemon themselves. Switch. The Pokemon available during a battle will be shown in squares on the right side of the screen. Once every 60 seconds, tapping on a square will cause them to switch places with the active Pokemon. Switching is usually done to remove a Pokemon from an unfavorable situation, placing them into a stasis and freezing their current health and energy. This puts the user's switch mechanic on a 60-second cooldown and grays out the Pokemon squares. Throughout charge attacks, Pokemon fainting, and even lag, the timer will continue to tick, being the only PvP mechanic that is consistent and impervious in Pokemon Go. Although the intention for switching is to protect a Pokemon, it regularly causes a dilemma. Being the first to switch tends to place the Pokemon into a worse scenario. This is because each player has an independent switch timer, unaffected by one another. If the opponent follows up a Pokemon that is more difficult to overcome, little to no progress has been made towards winning the match. What defines a suitable switch is specific to every team. Having a versatile moveset that deals different types of damage is one way to widen the reach of Pokemon. For instance, Empoleon has an innate weakness to fighting types, but can easily threaten these opponents using super effective Drill Peck. At times, an expensive and powerful charge attack will have a similar effect, reducing the risks tied to switching. There are also strategic uses for switching. A common tactic is the sacrificial swap, timing a switch to match an opponent's charge attack. The goal is to preserve the initial Pokemon in the same way you would with shields. You can swap a Pokemon that resists an anticipated move, but in most cases, it is done with a low health Pokemon acting as a figurative third shield. Due to the nature of switches and precise timing required, sack swaps can easily backfire and should always be used as a last resort. Effects. Effects are temporary stat modifiers tied to the use of certain charge attacks. They can be applied to the user or the opponent, affecting damage dealt and received. Effects are inspired by stat modifiers and status effects from the main series games. In Pokemon Go, they are often used to balance and add variety to charge attacks. Certain moves have added effects as a bonus, while others can be understood as a drawback or recoil. When examining moves like Brave Bird and Superpower, they deal much more damage than is expected from their energy costs. To offset the power of Brave Bird, it is tied to an effect that reduces the user's defense stat. For Superpower, both attack and defense are slightly lowered, meaning the Pokemon will take additional damage and deal less damage from that point forward. The opposite can be found in underwhelming charge attacks like Power Up Punch, which guarantees an attack boost. Other moves may even apply weakening effects to the opponent based on a lesser activation chance. Attack and defense can be simultaneously raised and reduced by multiple stages. Up to 4 stages can be applied to each stat, causing moves to deal twice as much or less than normal. Then again, all it takes is a minor stat change to make familiar matchups unpredictable. Despite the chaos, effects are usually applied gradually and persist only while a Pokemon is in active battle. Switching will cleanse all the effects tied to a Pokemon. Whether the debuffs are self-inflicted or caused by an opponent, their drawbacks can be immediately neutralized if a switch is available. On the other hand, players with buffed Pokemon will want to preserve its effects. Aggressively switching into a more effective Pokemon will leave the opponent no choice but to abandon its advantage. Conclusion. Many aspects of Pokemon Go stay close to its roots in the franchise. But when it comes to PvP, Niantic was bold to reinterpret the competitive format using the same tools built for gyms and raid battles. The result was simple, familiar, and fit for real-time mobile play. Trainer battles are designed to be fun and easy, while still providing enough room for ingenuity. Every action, pause, and misstep is projected onto the battlefield through the 5 PvP mechanics. The same applies to every risky shield bait and well-timed switch. They are all creative interpretations of these arbitrary rules acting as the bridge between Pokemon and trainer. Chapter 3. Meta. This chapter shifts the focus back onto Pokemon and the roles they play within a specific context. Unlike the mechanics of PvP, Pokemon can be added, moves adjusted, and battle formats rotated. These changes can be pushed by the developers, but trainers make the final decision on how they are represented in the competitive scene. Whether it's a Pokemon, team, or strategy, what is being used at a given time will be recognized as the meta. There is no consensus on the definition of meta because different games use it to describe their own unique environment. In Pokemon Go, the meta takes on the attributes of its Pokemon: typing, stat product, moveset, and most importantly, availability forms the power structure within each format. Since no element is invulnerable, neither is meta. The pieces for a winning combination become a liability against Pokemon fitted with the right type or move. This cycle continues back and forth, creating hierarchies of Pokemon that share a purpose versus those who serve to defeat it. Roles. The role of a Pokemon is influenced by, but distinct from, typing. Simply because Deoxys' defense form is a psychic type, it does not automatically determine its matchup against dark or steel type opponents. To identify what a Pokemon is capable of, we must also consider its movesets and matchups. With access to counter as a fast attack, Deoxys more closely resembles a fighting type Pokemon. Most Pokemon can serve a generic role based on typing alone, even if it is easily outperformed. For example, Ice and Rock can overcome flying type Pokemon, but this is only a fraction of what most steel types can achieve. If the dynamics between flying and steel were to change, other types would be quick to take up the mantle. This is because Ice, Rock, and Steel inherently serve the same purpose. The strengths and weaknesses and similarities of Pokemon eventually boil down to a few major roles. They can be labelled by the type of damage source, the Pokemon they imitate, the target type, and more. Because one type is always superior to another, most metas devolve into 3 roles matching that of a fighter, flyer, and tank. The names are unimportant but serve to provide a general idea of the attributes in each role. Fighter. Fighters tend to be the most aggressive bunch in the meta. They are blatantly named after fighting type Pokemon, which have the most volatile movesets and matchups. The raw power of fighting type moves also makes it easy for others to take on the role against dark and steel type opponents. Water type attackers frequently share this endeavour through the convenience of dual type overlap. The problem is, every strength has a weakness, and fighters have no shortage of both. Flyer. Flyers, fairies, psychics, and poisons all serve as anti-fighters. It is a simple task for many Pokemon, considering how widely resisted fighting types are. As a result, this tends to be the most inclusive role where trainers can potentially mix and match attributes. However, it is no coincidence that these types are accompanied by a weakness to steel. Tank. Tank is a term borrowed from other gaming communities and is used to recognize the ability to withstand damage. Steel-type Pokemon are the epitome of tanks, possessing 11 resistances and only 3 weaknesses. With such an oppressive defense, it is no wonder why fighting types are so highly valued. Resistances are not the only defensive tool. Dark and normal type Pokemon benefit from a lack of type interactions, allowing bulk and movesets to do the heavy lifting. Ice and rock types are notable for their similarities to steel, which can be useful when responding to different kinds of flyers. Conclusion. The meta is an ecosystem, whereas roles are the habitats. Pokemon are not confined to their roles, but they find the most success when it matches their strengths. Only the most powerful and unique Pokemon can move on to compete against the meta, fighting for the opportunity to be on a trainer's team. Any changes can have rippling effects, disturbing the balance of types and roles. This is evident in recurring Go Battle League formats, where the same metas have shifted unrecognizably after adjusting individual Pokemon. It does not take much to disturb an ecosystem, but the roles remain the same even if they are led by different Pokemon. This chapter is designed to pique your interest by examining Pokemon outside of a vacuum. Understanding the capabilities, roles, and hierarchy of Pokemon is to interpret typing, stat product, and moveset in relation to the meta. Ultimately, using more liberal yet practical methods of categorization lessen the need to inspect and compare every aspect of our Pokemon. Check it out! Pokemon Go Battle Simulator. Once again, we visit our friends at PvP because they provide much more than just lists of data. The Battle Simulator has been an invaluable tool for the community since the early days of PvP. It accurately depicts the outcome of any matchup, allowing trainers to choose the right Pokemon for the job. Simulations are not a replacement for practice, but the website also has a tool for that. Chapter 4. Line Building. Each player is required to select 3 Pokemon to enter in trainer battles. These teams of 3 are recognized as a line, comprised of a lead and 2 backline Pokemon. Although team can be used in its place, different formats use the terminology to differentiate battle-ready Pokemon from its candidates. In essence, a team is just more Pokemon and should be examined under the same prospects of typing, stat product, and moveset. The same synergies that exist within individual Pokemon occur across an entire line. Together, they can lean on the abilities of one another to overcome any Pokemon, strategy, and situation. Typing. A Pokemon's type is its most reliable form of defense. Like dual types that counteract their own weaknesses, different Pokemon can be paired together for protection. A trainer must consider how their line will respond to every type of Pokemon from the perspectives of both attacker and defender. To better illustrate the line building process, let us start with a simple and popular Pokemon. Venusaur is a grass and poison type and is limited to moves within its native typing. It does wonders against fighting and water, but is weak to fire, flying, ice, and psychic. To find a Pokemon that complements Venusaur, we should formulate a list of types that best combat its 4 weaknesses. A Steel-type Pokemon will resist flying, ice, and psychic, while Rock-type attacks are effective against fire, flying, and ice. It becomes clear that Venusaur takes on the role of a fighter-flyer hybrid and can benefit from a Steel or Rock-type tank such as Bastiodon, Empoleon, and Galarian Stunfisk. Grass, Poison, Rock, and Steel have near-perfect synergy, making line building with Venusaur rather convenient. However, this level of type coverage is uncommon across the remainder of a meta, requiring many lines to utilize the strengths of 3 carefully selected Pokemon. Note that covering for one's weaknesses can also be done through the offensive capabilities of movesets, as seen in Galarian Stunfisk's non-native Rock-type charge attack. Typing is the first line of defense and covers the most ground by dominating entire categories of Pokemon. There will be Pokemon that defy this relationship, but they are few and far between. By building a team with type effectiveness in mind, we are also taking the time to learn the limits of each Pokemon. Stat product. Stat product, more specifically, bulk, tells us how much a Pokemon can withstand. In extreme cases like Chansey, its defensive capabilities can surpass that of type effectiveness. The opposite rings true for attack-weighted Pokemon like Roserade, which is vulnerable to all forms of damage. Although Stat Product provides leverage in battle, not all types and movesets are available in the form of a bulky Pokemon. Shields provide limited amounts of artificial bulk. It is the solution to the Stat Product problem and allows trainers to incorporate offensive Pokemon into teams. However, 2 shields cannot be expected to protect 3 Pokemon, meaning all lines should fall back on the natural defenses of bulk. Even though there is strategy surrounding bulk, playstyle, and preference dictate much of the selection process. A bulky line does not always have the upper hand, but the most aggressive Pokemon leave no room for error. Being able to withstand multiple charge attacks will prolong a matchup, granting more opportunities to bait, shield, swap, and think. Moveset. Balanced movesets and lines should be able to deal both small and large quantities of damage. Fast attacks bypass shields and deal only the necessary amount to knock out a Pokemon. Energy delegates this responsibility to charge attacks, which should also synergize with itself using low and high cost moves. You will find certain combinations more suited for specific matchups and shield scenarios, but a team must still adapt to every possibility. The next chapter will go into detail about the importance of controlled damage and energy advantage. Although charge attacks are the key to recovering battles, they cannot be assumed to always provide the same impact due to the interference of shields. To a lesser degree, fast attacks enable Pokemon to perform regardless of shields and baits. Like all previous components, each restriction is remedied through its counterparts. In movesets, it is found in the assortment of damage and energy across a line of Pokemon. Check it out. Live streams. There is no shortage of talent in the Pokemon Go space. Over at Twitch, you can find international title holders, tournament organizers, coaches, and entertainers striving to be the very best. This is the perfect opportunity to support and learn from fellow battlers willing to share their knowledge with the community. Conclusion. Pokemon are carefully selected for their defensive typing, high stat product, and powerful moveset. Line building expands on the selection process to include 2 more Pokemon. This grants trainers the opportunity to further minimize a weakness, improve offensive capabilities, and consider different sources of damage. Unique combinations allow Pokemon to pressure shields, force switches, tank damage, and more. Every situation calls for a specific task, sometimes outside a Pokemon's ability. Diversifying traits across an entire line will foster creative team building and gameplay, while still providing the flexibility and consistency to perform. Chapter 5. The Advantages. The advantages theory was designed to explore how much control a trainer has over the outcome of a matchup. Between two Pokemon, shielding and baiting is effectively the only way to overcome an opponent. However, once we begin to examine outside the confines of an individual matchup, there are more ways to control shields, energy, and even the battles ahead. Pokemon Advantage, Energy Advantage, and Shield Advantage alone are not enough to guarantee a winning position. A Pokemon must be flexible in ways that allow them to benefit from additional resources. For example, a Pokemon that would faint solely to fast attacks has no use for an extra shield. Instead, the advantages are meant to reframe every moment as an opportunity for trainers to utilize the full potential of their Pokemon. Pokemon Advantage. Pokemon Advantage means to have more health or Pokemon, which aligns with the final goal in trainer battles. It can be obtained gradually throughout a battle, but is not a component of the game you can manipulate. Thus, Pokemon Advantage is split into more reasonable obtainable matchup and switch advantage. Matchup Advantage. Matchup Advantage embodies every aspect affecting the outcome of a matchup, including typing, stat product, moveset, current health, baiting, and shield scenario. It is an assessment of the tools and resources available to answer the question, is this a matchup I can win? The difficulty of a matchup can be classified as positive, neutral, or poor. A positive matchup is predetermined in your favor and will require an excess of energy or shields to reverse. A poor matchup would be seen from the opposite and unfavorable perspective. Lastly, a neutral matchup is one that results in a close battle, usually won by a small difference in health or energy. Recognizing matchups based on the expected outcome is critical for choosing when to switch and how to approach it. Unfortunately, matchup advantage is often a byproduct of other advantages and is heavily influenced by winning the lead. Switch advantage. The holder of switch advantage always decides what matchup is played out after a Pokemon leaves the battle. This can be gained if the opposing Pokemon is the first to faint or switch out. Gaining this advantage also implies matchup advantage, allowing players to align the subsequent matchups to their liking. The obvious benefits can continue throughout a battle and is arguably the most significant advantage. This places an even larger emphasis on choosing a lead that provides, at minimum, many neutral matchups. To ensure switch advantage, players can opt to use more shields than the opponent, trading one advantage for another. Energy advantage. An impactful charge attack is the reason for most wins and losses. With energy being the source of it all, it is important to consider how we generate and conserve this resource. Energy is generated using fast attacks. Although the process cannot be sped up, energy can be emphasized by selecting specific moves. Some Pokemon, like Cresselia, have damage and energy-based alternatives. If not, seek out other Pokemon sharing similar roles for fast attacks that serve your needs. Conservation is about wasting as little energy as possible. The classic method is by baiting, but another option is to refrain from casting a charge attack altogether. When the choice is between steady fast attacks versus an excessive charge attack, it may be better to whittle away an opponent in anticipation of the next Pokemon. Trainers can also create opportunities to generate energy. Undercharging is an advanced strategy that manipulates the charge attack minigame to deal reduced damage. The remaining health of an opponent can then be converted into extra fast attacks and energy. Losing switch advantage has this one benefit, using surviving Pokemon as an energy source for upcoming matchups. Before you decide to lose every lead, the ability to change an outcome varies between Pokemon and their movesets because energy is only as powerful as its charge attacks. Shield advantage. Shields can be cast to improve a matchup, reclaiming other advantages. On the other hand, prioritizing shield advantage itself is to invest a future matchup. Countless possibilities are formed from a limited supply of shields, thus compelling trainers to examine how Pokemon perform under varying conditions. Shield advantage can only be given up by a player, seeing as this resource cannot be replenished until the end of a battle. It requires one side to withhold shields while the opposition commits to defending their Pokemon. The difference in shield use will swing the resulting matchup unless negated by another advantage. Obtaining shield advantage is a risky endeavour, leaving one's Pokemon vulnerable to charge attacks. However, Pokemon thrive under different circumstances. Depending on the opponent's playstyle and team, it may be best to fully protect and rely on the virtues of a single Pokemon. Conclusion. Take into each battle the idea of trading and sacrificing different advantages. Consider spending everything to gain switch advantage or a little health and time to stockpile energy. There is no right way to pursue an advantage, but there is always one to gain. At most, matchup advantage is decided at the start of a game. At any point in time, switch, energy, and shield advantage can be reversed. They are formed in the crossover of matchups and found in every level of play. It is on the trainer to recognize and pursue each advantage as an opportunity to create or maintain a lead. Check it out. Niantic support. Pokemon Go is always juggling exciting new updates, bugs, and events. There are many channels in which trainers can stay up to date with the game, including their website, Twitter, and even other content creators. To learn more about pre-existing features, look no further than Niantic's support page, which contains countless guides on both Pokemon and the Pokemon Go experience. Chaz, WildSusanBoyle, Co. Chaz is driven by the desire to learn as a streamer, gamer, and Pokemon Go PvP coach. His competitive nature and passion for the game has long anticipated the release of trainer battles. He saw it as a level playing field unaffected by experience points, raids, gym battles, medals, and dust, an aspect of the game dictated by effort and skill. Since late 2018, Chaz has spent thousands of hours on PvP. He fought against and alongside many first-generation battlers, trying to make sense of an entirely new feature and format. Experiencing the full height of each hurdle and being inspired by other content creators, Chaz felt the responsibility to pave stones in his own wake. In 2020, Chaz began writing blog-like posts relating to all things PvP. It would feature teams, strategies, and a formulaic approach to trainer battles. Every piece was an opportunity to learn, teach, and learn again, never taking for granted what he knew. His methods of coaching became the foundation for this guide, arranged and named after an original series he titled Basics.